and we are glad to have our next contribution. My charming colleague is going to present Edgars Ceske. To you.
Okay, so Edgars Ceske is a doctor of history, the senior specialist of the research department of the Turaida Museum Reserve in Latvia. And his main scientific interests are the ways of expansion of the ideas of enlightenment in the Baltic region, the travel literature of Baltic Germans, the history of manors in Livland Vidzeme area in the 19th, early 20th century. He's an author of approximately 30 scientific articles. Also, he investigated sources of history about the country parishes in Livland in the 19th century, the abolition of serfdom in Livland and its consequences, the history of hereditarians in Livland and their handwriting literature in the end of 18th and first half of 19th century. And today we will hear his presentation with the title The Development of Two Manors Inspired by Traveling Abroad, Theodor von der Ropp and Lorenz von Campenhausen. Welcome.
Dear participants and colleagues, it is a really great honor for me to sit in front of so highly professional auditorium. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this conference for invitation and to continuing the tradition that Louisa Sebra started yesterday and others lectures today. I would like also to focus on personalities in my report. More correctly, on two personalities, Theodor von der Ropp and Lorenz von Campenhausen. What unites both of these personalities? At first, both of them were estate owners, both relatively young men, and both tried to materialize their impressions gained during their travels in the architecture of their manors and parks. In this case, about only two small examples: a stone arch bridge in Pokruojis Manor in Lithuania and the Swiss cottage in Turaida, Latvia. Of course, our heroes had been only once rather than confirmation of regularity. This phenomenon has his special designation, Grand Tour, and it took place all over Europe from the beginning of the 17th century. Travels in higher society had been considered as an essential tool for building a successful career and all-around personal development. For the sons of nobles or wealthy citizens, it was mandatory after completing their studies. So also the first of our heroes of today, Theodor von der Ropp, after graduating Academic Gymnasium of Mito, now Jelgava, at the age of about 18, together with his older brother Ferdinand, set off more than 4-year journey through Europe, visiting France, Spain, Portugal, Gibraltar, Italy, Sicily, Switzerland, Germany, and Netherlands. The name of Theodor von der Ropp is in Lithuanian culture is well known, particularly for 3 reasons. As you know, maybe he built the neoclassical ensemble of Pokruojis Manor. During his trips abroad, he created one of the largest private collections of paintings in the Baltic at that time, and he was supported of the later famous Danish sculptor Bertel Tolbotsen. But by the way, I cannot help mentioning strange coincidence here. About months ago, when I started working on this report, a certain Henry von der Ropp, who later turned out to be a direct descendant of Theodor von der Ropp, came forward completely out of the blue. He had read one of my articles about Theodor, his travel diaries, and wanted copies of them. So then we are corresponding. He sent a valuable gift, catalogue of the exhibition of art objects of Ropp collection in Kaunas Čiurlionis Museum, which was compiled by director of this museum, Osvaldas Daugelis, who now sadly has passed away. The main building of the Pokruojis Manor is very well known in Lithuania, I hope. And this is about Ropp's travel diaries. This his travel diaries is maybe lesser known, but they are kept in the Department of Rare Books and Manuscripts of Latvian National Library. They cover the period of 18th century 2 to 18th century 4 with some omissions and are written mainly in French with small interludes in German. The originals have not been found so far, but there are few copies typed in 1800s and 1902 by Theodor's grandson Friedrich von der Radvillan. What in brief is the informative potential of Theodor von der Ropp's travel diaries. Von der Ropp tries to, accurately as possible, to document the formal parameters of journey, departure and arrival times, means of transport, prices or post horses, distances between settlements, surrounding terrain and level of land cultivation or on civilization. The description of cities is characterized by constructivism and polarization. They are beautiful or ugly, depending on whether the streets in them are wide or narrow, straight or crooked, paved or unpaved, illuminated or dark, etc. The first group includes Cadiz, Madrid, Livorno, Pisa, Catania and others. The second, Avignon, Malaga, Narbona, Bari in Apulia, Italia. Very ugly is Montpellier. Ugly for the Zoff is often associated with the term old, that is, means medieval. However, the dirtiest of all seems to be Lisbon, where the streets are so full of garbage or ordures and all kinds of animal carcasses that foreign risks drowning in them or being buried in the manure which is thrown out of the windows at every moment without warning passers-by. The description of the local population from the point of view of traveler safety is equally polarized. The source of France, Sicily and some areas of Italy are particularly dangerous. We were accompanied by soldiers from Marseille to Toulon to protect us from robbers. The area from Radicofani to Terracina in Italy is nothing but a desert inhabited by beggars and robbers. In Lisbon, not long ago, people were killed in the streets in broad daylight, and the shameless of these robbers even went so far as to stipulate a certain amount of money that each pedestrian must have with them in order to not be killed. However, not all the characteristics of inhabitants of the countries visited are exclusively negative. For example, the inhabitants of city of Brindisi in Apulia in southern Italy, they are very hospitable. The Sicilians are most cheerful and kind-hearted people I know, except for the Swiss. Their kindness and hospitality towards the strangers is incredible. Von der Ropp's diaries, however, mainly testify to the author's profound knowledge of the art history, especially that of ancient Greece and Rome. He repeatedly refers to the most prominent 18th century researcher of art or art historian Joachim Winkelmann, as well to the book of French astronomer and traveler Joseph Jérôme Delalande. Ropp's educational orientation and interests most fully characterize the educational system of higher estate, in which the ancient culture had a huge predominance. Von der Ropp describes in detail the monuments of ancient architecture, from Roman engineering structures, pont du Gard near Nimes, or sacred structures, temples in Pest Company, etc. And now, Pont du Gard or Pont across Garonne in southern France. So, it's believed that the first one was influenced by the latter. This could be so, and at the same time not. So, with the naked eye, it's visible that the bridge in Pokruojis Manor, what is built in 1821, it has only 2 and not 3 rows or tiers of arches as Pont du Gard. The number of arches in the first case is also smaller, and they are slightly more pointed than Pont du Gard. But the main thing is the slope of the second and slightly also the first arcade on both their ends. This suggests that Ceske is more likely to talk about general idea inspired by Theodor von der Ropp's Grand Tour than an attempt to list partially a copy of this structure. And then we see the fragment of his travel diary in the first volume, and about this Pont du Gard, but here is not emotionally impressions, but only technical dates, numbers, and so on. It's very dry information, not emotional information. So the second ensemble. Where we can talk about travel inspired is Turaida Manor. Unlike this, the one mentioned above, this building is not inspired by antique architecture, but it is so called a Swiss cottage or Swiss house. Dainis Brudis, my colleague and architectural historian in Latvia, in his and Inas Līnes monograph devoted to Swiss cottage of Turaida Manor, writes that it is unusually early example of Swiss style architecture, which significantly precedes not only after similar buildings in Latvia, but also most of the hallmark structures elsewhere in Europe. This building became one of the earliest examples of such infrastructure in all of Europe. It should be noted that in Sigulda region or district within a small area, there have been as many as 3 Swiss houses or Swiss cottages located about 3 kilometers apart from each other. Of these, only the first one is cottage of Siguldano. Then the second one is cottage of Crimon or Crimulda, and this is mentioned the Turaida Swiss cottage. But only at moment only the Swiss house in Crimulda built in 1851 has served to this day. The Swiss cottage of Turaida was built at the time was when Turaida Manor belonged to Johann Lorenz von Campenhausen. By the way, Lorenz von Campenhausen was the great-grandson of Balthasar von Campenhausen, the owner of Orellen or Burmeijer of a manor in Lithuania, and mentioned by Professor Bock, yes, Sabina Bock, excuse me. So, yesterday. And as noted by Daniel Brugis, there is a reason to believe that the idea of construction of such building is that Lorenz von Campenhausen conceived during the honeymoon with his wife, 21 years younger than him, Helene Ulrike Sophia, born Baroness Estelle von Holstein, while traveling through Germany and Switzerland. That the travels inspired this Swiss house. And Alexander Stefan Holstein, grandson of Lorenz, in his memoirs writes that his grandfather surpassed the average level of his peers in culture and civilization in his homeland. During this trip or journey, married couple Campenhausen became parents of their first 2 children. We can surely assert that it was precisely the romantic building seen in Switzerland that inspired Lorenz von Campenhausen to create something similar in Turaida. An important role also played by Lorenz's extensive knowledge and openness to new ideas, as he, in the words of grandson Lorenz von Campenhausen's personality is characterized by 2 seemingly opposites. On one hand, he was an outspoken aesthete who gladly engaged in the fine arts. He drew painted landscapes and watercolors and crafted copper ornaments, but a curious detail preserved in the family legend in his manor, mentioned in his grandson's Alexander's memories. Even his white knee-length socks. He sent Lorenz, following the fashion of the 18th century, wore so-called culottes. He said to be washed in London because they could not be cleaned sufficiently well in the state. On the other hand, he was pragmatic master who cherished for reaching plans for the introduction of progressive management agricultural methods. Unfortunately, all these plans were dashed by his premature death on September 1830. The only project he managed to realize was a Swiss cottage, also known as Cavalier House. As Alexander von Holstein writes, the prototypes from the Swiss cottage in the Manor Turaida was at first the wooden or correctly born model that was brought back from the foreign trip, along with the appropriate Cooper engraving. After testimony from his grandson is also confirmed by the mention of the model and engraving in the state inventory descriptions after the death of Lorenz von Campenhausen. Acknowledging that the Swiss house of Turaida Manor could have been created after the mentioned model brought from Switzerland, Danish Buddhist still calls for the consideration of another version, that the source of the inspiration could also be linked to an interest in English culture. One of the arguments is Lorenz von Campenhausen's enthusiasm for the English landscape park. Examples of Swiss house project were provided, for example, for instance, in the collection published in 1823 by English architect Peter Frederick Robinson. Several graphic representations of the Turaida Manor Swiss house are known. The oldest one is a lithograph created by Georg Friedrich Schlatter around 1843 and made after the drawing by August Matthias Kagen. The second one is a lithograph printed in 1847 in the workshop of Franz Kampstengel in Dresden, based on drawing by Theodor Heinrich Rickmann. If one believes the opinion of Latvian architect Paul Campe, who dated Rickmann's drawings around 1842, it can be concluded that the both authors captured the building almost simultaneously. Only the drawing of Rickmann's building is shown from the direction of Sigulda or Segevult this time. Starting from the second half of 1880s, there appears many photographs and especially postcards. What were the functions of this building? Also, Alexander Stelton Horsten declares it served to accommodate the fine guests of manor owners. Family, nevertheless, from the very beginning, its primary purpose was to be inn and hotel. During the manor season, it was also used as the boarding house for vacationers. But it must to be especially mentioned in connection with the national awakening Latvians, so-called Young Latvieši or New Latvians. Since 1848, a Latvian teacher conference of Bixten Manor had been held there, and in 1906 and 9, their young teacher, Atis Kronvalds, spoke for the first time his report in this conference in Latvian. Before that, the working language of conference was only German. In this speech, Kronvalds opposed the current trends of Germanization of Latvians and advocated the idea that Latvian children should receive education the same in the native language, and the content of education should be the same as in the most developed Western European countries. The Swiss house of Turaida Manor also destined for pairs such trials in the following years that usually happen in establishments where large quantities of alcohol are consumed. Armed robberies rose, but during the revolution of 1905, also punitive expeditions of Tsarist government excesses until its sad end in October 1944, ending up the crossfire of World War II. In that way, Pokruojis Manor complex and Turaida Pokruojis Manor complex and Turaida Swiss cottage may be two examples for inspiration of landowners through their foreign travels. Also, there were a distance of approximately 20 years. However, distance of time of construction of buildings between them is insignificant. At the same time, the differences between both buildings are significant. The Pokruojis Manor has been built in neoclassicism style, which finds its origin from ancient Greek order. But Turaida Swiss cottage in opposite reminds house of Swiss peasants' house. Despite this, both examples indicate that the modern currents of Western Europe reached the province of Baltics quite quickly. That the Baltics were closely integrated into a unified European cultural space. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. After the first session with the women, we are now back on the male front. Two very interesting examples. Are there any questions? Yes. Sorry.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation. We have our first Swiss cottage in Estonia built in the 1830s, but the connection is completely different because the first one is built in Keila, perhaps you know this place. The cottage is actually designed by the architect, I don't remember the first name, but the last name is Stockenschneider, who comes from around the circles of St. Petersburg. But I find it interesting that this Turaida owner went to Switzerland and did the grand tour there. So how this style comes to the Baltics is quite interesting, how different it is. But I would comment on the Swiss house. I found the first one in an English garden landscape magazine in the 1780s. I think it was by Johann Grohmann. That was the first one that I noticed. But I found proper instructions from the 1840s, so it comes later, and it was written by two Swiss authors. Yeah, but before that, it is more, we find more drawings, I would say, so the instructions do come later. Yeah. But the module that you showed, that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for your remark. I have not material enough to talk in general, yes. But I can speak only about Turaida, about Campenhausen that is in 1940s, yeah, maybe earlier, maybe, but not all travelers wrote their impressions, wrote their diaries, and not all diaries have been preserved, yeah, and so we have a lack of information. And this is not the main theme of my research work.